Hello, everyone. Good morning to our participants joining us from the West Coast, and good afternoon to all of you from the East Coast. Those of you in Central Time, thank you for joining us during your lunch hour. During these socially distanced but always connected times, we are delighted that you could all take time from your busy schedules to join us. At HealthIMPACT, our mission is to bring healthcare leaders together to build a better healthcare system, and this pandemic has made that mission more urgent than ever before. As the world looks to the pharma and biotech community to bring forth a vaccine as quickly and safely as possible, there's nothing more important than how researchers and manufacturers work together globally to make this happen, which makes today's webinar extremely timely. With that, I welcome you to the future of digital collaboration for pharma and biotech. My name is Megan Antonelli, and I'm the CEO of Purpose Events. We are the organizers of the HealthIMPACT Forum and partner with Node Health on their Digital Medicine Conference. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see a control panel at the upper right corner of your screen. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to go over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we don't have time to answer your question today, we will follow up in the post-event communications with an answer. After the webinar, you will receive a link to a brief survey. We would greatly appreciate your feedback as we continue to build valuable resources for our community. In addition, you will receive an email next week with a link to the webinar recording and the registration information for our next webinar. We welcome you to share this with your colleagues. Now, I would like to introduce Daniel Carcetti, Senior Director of Business Development and Strategy at Microsoft, who will be our moderator today. Daniel leads the development and implementation of strategic plans and partnerships associated with new product and partner offerings in life sciences. Previously, he was a founding member and the Director of Business Development and Strategy for Microsoft Genomics. Prior to joining Microsoft, Daniel spent 16 years of his career at Johnson & Johnson. Daniel holds a bachelor's degree from LaSalle University and an MBA from Cornell University. Daniel, that's an impressive bio. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Now let me virtually pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Megan, and welcome everyone to what we hope will be an informative and productive use of your time today. I am Daniel Carcetti with Microsoft. I'm joined by Oliver Pierce and Michael Zwetko of Montrium. And as Megan mentioned, we're here to talk to you today about the future of digital collaboration in life sciences. We have a lot to cover, so I'll turn it over to Oliver and Michael to quickly introduce themselves and to introduce you to Montrium. Gentlemen.
Great. Yep, great. Thanks, Daniel. Nice to meet everybody. This is Michael Zwetko. I'm the Vice President of Professional Services here at Montrium. I'm responsible for the group that provides services to life science organizations that are seeking to leverage cloud technologies to help improve their GXP processes. And I'm joined by my colleague, Oliver.
Thank you for that, Michael. So Oliver Pierce, I'm the Director of Commercialization at Montrium. Been working with Montrium now for just under 8 years. And my role primarily at Montrium is to assist and empower life science organizations in their transition to digital tools and a number of different technologies. And being that Montrium specializes on the compliance and GXP side of Microsoft technologies, we are incredibly excited about being a part of today's session. I think, just to kind of kick things off in terms of introducing Montrium, and for those of you that are not familiar with us, of course, I think many of you are familiar with Microsoft, but just a kind of a high-level overview of who we are and what we do. So Montrium is primarily a technology and consulting company. We were founded in 2005 and have been working exclusively in the life sciences since our inception. We're actually Canadian-made and Canadian-born and sort of headquartered here in Montreal, Canada, but we're also a global organization and serve customers around the world, as well as from our European office in Brussels. And the primary focus of today's discussion is really around how life science organizations can leverage Microsoft and the ecosystem that Microsoft provides for life science organizations. And Montrium is a deeply embedded partner with Microsoft and has been working with Microsoft for many, many years, helping in partnership to help organizations transition to more digital collaboration tools. So with that, I'll kick it back to Daniel to kind of go through the agenda.
Great, thanks, Oliver. We want to cover a lot in this next 50 minutes or so. I'll talk to you a little bit about what Microsoft's doing in life sciences, give you a quick state of the union on where we are now with the use of the cloud in life sciences, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the impact that the COVID-19 disruption has given us, the challenges, this new normal of remote working. I can almost guarantee most of you joining us today are dialing in from your kitchens, your home offices, or your dining room tables, and perhaps like me, you might have a child or a teenager playing Xbox in the background, so forgive me if you hear some random screaming. We certainly find ourselves in an extraordinary and unprecedented situation, that's for sure. After the State of the Union, I'll turn it over to Oliver and Michael to give you an overview of what was formerly known as Office 365, now Microsoft 365, M365, and we'll talk about the benefits of M365 and cover all the items you see on this list here later. So we'll also leave time for questions, as Megan mentioned. If you have questions along the way, put them in the question panes in the control panel on the right of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so let's jump in. Our mission statement, Microsoft's mission statement, is all about empowerment. The mission statement here at Microsoft is empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And we empower life science organizations to achieve more by really bringing our technology and our products together in experiences that unlock the value for our customers. We're focused on 5 core solution areas in modern workplace, Microsoft 365, which we'll be talking about today, our business applications suite, which is Microsoft Dynamics 365, our applications and infrastructure, which is our Microsoft Power Platform, and our data and AI, which is Microsoft Azure. And of course, all of that is with the strong suite of partnerships we have within our extensive Microsoft partner ecosystem. And for us, really, the foundation is built on these 3 pillars: trust, integrity, and scale. We have the highest levels of commitment to trust and security as a company. We've invest over $1 billion annually in security, and our Cyber Defense Operations Center brings together security experts from across our company, really, to help protect, detect, and respond 24/7, 365 a year to security threats in real time. And we've got the most comprehensive set of compliance offerings of any cloud service provider, and more certifications than anyone in the market, and Montreal will touch on that later. We have industry-leading scale, and we continue to invest. We've invested over $15 billion in cloud infrastructure with over 1 million physical servers. Now we're in 60+ global regions in 140 countries. And finally, integrity. We don't compete with you, or we don't monetize your data. We're focused on trust, and we're always empowering, never competing with our customers. And that's really important because we don't want to monetize your data. It's your data, it's your customers, it's your patients' data. We're simply the stewards of that data. And we're not new to this space. Microsoft's been serving health and life sciences, the marketplace, for over 40 years. We have over 1,500 dedicated healthcare professionals like myself globally, dedicated here to help and support you. And we are heavily invested to bring resources to the table to partner with you. So as you know, in the world of commercial research and science, there's probably no undertaking more daunting and more expensive than the process of bringing these new medicines to market. And clearly, a top priority for life sciences companies like yours is streamlining drug development. It's an urgent issue, particularly as we face this pandemic around human health more broadly, really having new ways to treat old sicknesses like malaria that still unfortunately kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, or really developing these new vaccines to prevent highly contagious diseases like COVID. The impact is enormous, and if we could just invent new medicines faster, that would solve a lot of the challenges and issues we're facing. And we at Microsoft, we really seek to help by driving that faster clinical advancement, by modernizing discovery, development, quality systems, really looking to support rapid modeling, improve clinical trial management, trying to just remove barriers to new product development. And what you see here are just a couple examples of some of the work we've done with our customers and our partners. I wanted to call out one in particular, which is our strategic alliance with Novartis. We're currently collaborating with them to explore how to take advantage of Microsoft's AI technology. That combined with Novartis's deep life sciences expertise, we're really looking to find new ways to address the challenges underlying really every phase of drug development. That includes research, that's clinical trials, all the way through manufacturing, ops, and finance. And so as part of the work that we are doing with Novartis and the data scientists from Microsoft Research, we are teaming up and working together to investigate how AI can really transform new approaches to drug development. We're looking at 3 specific areas. The first is a personalized treatment for macular degeneration, which is near and dear to my heart, as my mother suffers from that disease and has lost vision in her eyes. The second is involving exploring really ways how we can make AI help manufacture new gene and cell therapies. And so we're working on that. And lastly, really looking to leverage AI to shorten the time required to design new medicines. We're leveraging our pioneering neural networks that are developed by Microsoft to generate, screen, and select promising molecules. So as we continue to work together and move forward with Novartis, we expect the scope of the joint research will continue to grow, and we're super excited about the potential for this collaboration and transformation in R&D for life sciences. So let's move on to the State of the Union. Let's talk about where we are with the use of the cloud in life sciences. As I mentioned earlier, we find ourselves certainly in an extraordinary and an unprecedented situation. Life science teams are more distributed than ever before, and really ensuring compliance across this complex regulatory landscape can be challenging if, like all of us right now, are dispersed geographically. And we throw on top of that these outdated processes and systems that we're working with in today, which is really hindering efficiency and productivity, certainly making collaboration difficult. And then you really add on top of that the strict regulations around electronic records and electronic signatures. I mean, the bottom line is information is difficult to exchange electronically, and certainly without the right tools. You can look at things like 21 CFR Part 11, which requires the validation of systems used for electronic records and signatures, and we have to demonstrate how these features and functions adhere to business needs and regulations. We've got to ensure that they're configured and maintained in a controlled state. It's just one challenge after another, and certainly now in this new normal we're living in, working remotely can be a challenge if your organization is not appropriately set up to do so. You know, having the tools to keep you productive everywhere from any device is more crucial for companies now than ever before. And did I mention that the manual process and the paper delay development process is there as well? So we need to reduce our dependency on this cumbersome paper and ink signature world that we live in. And I think we'd all agree on that. And the cloud helps us do that, right? I mean, it's a $15.1 billion market now, and life sciences companies are continuing to digitally transform and leveraging the cloud. We at Microsoft have been working with life sciences companies for years in their digital transformation and migration to the cloud, but it's certainly over the last 6 months with the world we live in now, that has accelerated significantly. So where does that present an opportunity for us? And really it's what I'd like to call the kind of the 3 low-hanging fruit of inefficiencies right now in life sciences, and that's R&D, clinical trials, and labeling. And I want to bring Oliver in here to just give us a little bit more color. I mean, Oliver, can you talk a little bit about where these inefficiencies lie in these 3 areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that introduction there, Daniel. So, I mean, obviously there are a number of different areas that we cover within life sciences that have inefficiencies, and a lot of those inefficiencies have been greater exposed, during some of the time that Daniel was mentioning around sort of where we are now in COVID. But if we look at R&D, it is an incredibly complex area. Not only made even more complicated by regulations and security requirements, but R&D requires us to record, store, process, and analyze an enormous amount of data. And so, to be able to cope with this influx of data, we need to be able to have a series of tools that can empower more efficient and cost-effective management of that data. And so, there are some huge inefficiencies that, not just big organizations are dealing with today, also smaller organizations that are embarking on this for the first time. But of course, the larger the organization, the larger the program, the larger the volume, and so the problem is larger, and that's true also for clinical trials. When we think about the vast majority of data that is collected and created is done so during the clinical development process, and so it's part of the product lifecycle that I personally think could benefit the most from digital transformation. Clinical trials today can be incredibly disconnected. Often we're running global studies in multiple regions. So to courier that data, to transfer and emerge that data across those regions can be challenging without the right tools. And so that's an area where we really see a huge opportunity for life science organizations to get a win from leveraging cloud. And then, of course, you have labeling. Labeling is an important and critical step in the medicinal product lifecycle. And we see a lot of organizations leveraging cloud to be able to realize some of those benefits. It's really, really important that we are ensuring that the medicinal products, the drugs that we're releasing, are safe and effective. And through that process, we need to make sure that the labeling process has the right level of detail. And so it's one of the most crucial aspects of pharmaceutical delivery. So those are the sort of three areas. And of course, we could talk for hours around some of the other inefficiencies, but I think, what we should do now is talk about the cloud and how can we move to the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly extraordinary opportunity, but the ability to digitally transform things like clinical trials, like you said, but it also presents some challenges, right? One of the primary challenges that life sciences organizations are faced with is the fact that the regulatory agencies like FDA have not updated regulations or really issued any specific guidance regarding the use of the cloud in the context of hosting GXP applications. And just as one example, I mean, we talked about 21 CFR Part 11, which is one of the FDA regulations that often applies to computerized systems for GXP activities. That was published in 1997. So I want to bring Michael into the conversation here, because can you talk a little bit about some of these compliance and technical challenges, because it's certainly an opportunity, but I'll turn it over to you to kind of give us a little more color here.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, to think that the World Wide Web was just in its infancy back then in 1997. So it's definitely been a while. But to give them some credit, the FDA does participate in various industry forums, such as like the ISPE Special Interest Group on GXP Cloud Computing, which I'm a member of. They participate in these sessions, and they provide their feedback and their insights into what their thinking is, and kind of giving us guidance on what to look out for. They're trying to hear what our challenges are, what our concerns are. So there is definitely some discussion and dialogue going on. The other challenge that a lot of organizations are faced with is the fact that there's limited visibility in a lot of cases with the cloud services service providers quality control. So obviously, when dealing with an on-premise solution, the organization has complete control and visibility over everything that's going on. So in this case, we're outsourcing part of that to the cloud service provider, and so that becomes an important aspect of being able to leverage a cloud solution. The other is the fact that in a lot of cases, there's an inability to perform on-site audits of the cloud service provider. Now, we understand that obviously global cloud service providers such as Microsoft and others, that it would be very difficult to accommodate every single organization, and in terms of doing an audit on premise. And so this is definitely a challenge, but we'll be discussing throughout the presentation the ways that we can mitigate some of these challenges. When it comes to technical challenges, there's obviously the fact that we're dealing with a multi-tenant environment, so there's concerns of their security and data privacy, making sure that other customers can't see each other's data. And I'd say one of the biggest also concerns is the fact that, with most cloud applications, there's changes that are being performed on a continual basis and that are not necessarily under the control of the regulated user or the organization. And with on-premise systems, they're used to being able to manage that whole process, and then in a lot of cases it meant that systems would not change very often because in some cases it was too laborious or difficult to go through that process. So in the context of the cloud, now we're looking at these continuous changes occurring, which could be a challenge from the perspective of validation, but it could also be an opportunity to make sure that users are receiving the best of breed products throughout the life cycle. So the other aspect that most life science organizations struggle with is implementing the proper governance and understanding what their responsibilities are, given that we're working in this shared responsibility model. So I'll be discussing a little bit later on in the presentation what are all the different elements that can be used or controls that can help mitigate some of these challenges.
Great, so I'll turn it over to you to give kind of the intro. I know we have a poll that will start off, but I'll turn it over to the Montreum folks to talk a little bit about M365. But we have this poll first.
Yeah.
Hand it to Oliver, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for that. So, one of the things that we like to do is kind of just get a bit of a feel for the audience. And so we've got a poll here, and if you guys could spend a few seconds just kind of giving us your perspective. Are you guys currently using Microsoft 365 in your organization today? And are you using it for only non-GXP content, so stuff that is not a regulated record? Are you using it for GXP content and for non-GXP content? Or are you not using Microsoft 365 at all? So we'll give you guys a few seconds and then we'll see what the results are. And I can see them coming in now with pretty interesting results so far. Give you guys a few more seconds. Okay, all right, so we'll close it up and let's share the results. So interestingly enough, half of you on the line today are using Microsoft 365, but not for GXP content, which is interesting, which is probably a big reason why you guys are attending today's webinar, because you're trying to understand how you can. A smaller percentage of you guys are already using it for GXP content, and 38% of you are not currently using Microsoft 365. So that's also interesting. So hopefully some of the information today will help guide your next step in this process. So I guess, just to kind of go into Microsoft 365 in a little bit more detail, talking about, why are we having this discussion today? What's the purpose of this webinar? And, why is it important that as life science organizations, we look at Microsoft 365 seriously? As Daniel was mentioning earlier on in the presentation, Microsoft's commitment to life sciences is something that they've been working on for over 40 years. And so, through technology and how technology has changed over the years, we've seen a huge adoption of SharePoint, Microsoft 365, Azure, and Dynamics for the use of managing data within the life sciences. And so we can see here some really interesting statistics. 167% increase in SharePoint Online adoption. 17% of all data in Microsoft 365 is classed as sensitive. So that's obviously very interesting, and that talks a lot to the confidence, I think, that life science organizations have in the controls and the effort that Microsoft puts here. Over 200 active monthly users, and I anticipate that number has probably gone up quite considerably during COVID-19. And over 1 million companies using Microsoft 365. And again, I expect that statistic also has increased more recently. So let's talk a little bit about the drivers for Microsoft 365, right? For 38% of you on the line today that are not using 365, why should you? So if we look at the environment that we're in today, the days of monolithic and static applications are numbered. There may be a few on-premise systems kicking around today, but the vast majority of systems that we leverage today are cloud-based. More and more activities are outsourced, And so we need a modern tool set to be able to collaborate with both internal and external parties. Very, very important, not only from a collaboration perspective, but also from a data governance perspective, as we start to see the regulation reference governance in more detail. Of course, we talked earlier on, and this will be a theme throughout this presentation, the mobile workforce. If we think about, most of us today are dialing in, as Daniel mentioned, from our kitchen tables or from our home offices. We need to have tools that enable that remote work, that mobile workforce. And the life sciences is not new to remote work. There's a huge amount of individuals that have been working remotely for many, many years, but more of us are now working remotely. And so it's really, really important that as organizations that we're set up to do so. And then of course, Microsoft 365 has evolved tremendously over the years to now have a very robust and feature-rich set of functionalities and capabilities that allow us as life science organizations to manage these GXP activities. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits. Microsoft 365 has a number of different applications and tools available to life science organizations, and that comes in the form of an extensive suite of professional tools. Gone are the days of just relying specifically on Microsoft Office applications. Microsoft 365 now has a whole range of different tools that can be leveraged throughout the life science team. And those tools are often natively integrated. So you're able to gain some real efficiencies from connecting critical business processes. Microsoft 365 has seen a real increase in adoption within the life sciences for non-GXP. I would challenge any of you on the line today to kind of tell me an organization that doesn't use Microsoft 365 today in some capacity. I think what we're seeing more and more now is organizations making that leap to managing GXP activities and content within Microsoft 365. Now, because it has such an extensive suite of professional tools, it's adaptable to almost any business process. And so you're able to build some really powerful tools and processes within the platform to enable some of these critical life science processes. Not only that, there's a huge amount of guidance and information that's available, some that Montreal has collaborated with Microsoft on in the past, as well as a number of independent and verified audit reports and information that can be made accessible for you to be able to verify and get guidance on how to leverage Microsoft 365 within your organization. And on top of that, of course, it's a leading content management platform. It has a whole range of features that support GXP content. And it's one of the most cost-effective solutions for life sciences that are looking to make that first leap into digital transformation and digital collaboration. So at this point, though, I imagine that the vast majority of you on the line are thinking, okay, I get it. Microsoft 365 is applicable and useful, but how can that apply to my business? And we see Microsoft 365 and other Microsoft technologies being used in a number of different use cases. And because Microsoft 365 is a very configurable content management platform, you can leverage it in almost every part of your business. And so, often what we see is the quality teams within life science organizations are leveraging the platform for managing their underlying quality processes. So things like SOPs and quality document management. Of course, the management and maintenance of training activity. We're also seeing things like change control, audit management, even quality events like incidents, CAPAs, deviations, etc. We also see data management groups leveraging Microsoft 365. They're able to collaborate externally with a number of different partners to be able to transfer information in and out of Microsoft 365. We also see regulatory affairs, medical writing, as well as clinical trial teams leverage the robust content management functionality to be able to really empower their clinical and regulatory programs. So preparing the trial master file, preparing for regulatory submissions, whether that be INDs or NDAs in the United States or any other application in Europe and around the world. And then, of course, we've got general records management. So the built-in functionality within Microsoft 365 is really catered and tailored to perform powerful record review and archiving of GXP records. giving you the tools that you need to manage an end-to-end process. So I just want to finish off talking a little bit about a case study, because I know that, often the conversation is, I understand the information, I feel confident in the tools that are in front of me, but I want to understand how other organizations are using this today. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about a case study for an organization that Montreal has worked with and helped transition to Microsoft 365. They're a growing life science organization where unfortunately they had documents that were scattered across various different file shares and legacy document management systems. At an organization of around 1,400 employees, they had around 50 different functional groups, and most of those functional groups were managing documents in a different way, in a non-standard way. And you can see here over 40,000 different types of documents being managed across each functional group. So very, very challenging records management environment. When we look at some of the pain points, users were confused where to put content because there was, no real standard system. Every functional group had their own tool to work in. They were, spending money using tools that were providing the same sorts of capabilities. So some waste around technology spend. It was expensive and difficult to apply records management across numerous solutions. When you're working with a number of different tools, they all have their subtle nuances that you have to build into your process. So it made for a very disjointed and disconnected records management process, which led to obviously, duplication of content being very difficult to try and find when you're trying to locate specific content for an activity. Collaboration was of course difficult because individuals would have to access multiple systems to really get what they needed. External access was also challenging. Access in general when you're managing a number of different systems from different providers, it's a maze to try and figure out how you can actually bring those groups together. And then metadata was, too heavy. It took too much time and it was killing productivity. So some of these systems were just asking for too much, and so the user decided that they didn't want to, continue to participate in those tools, and so that made the reality of compliance risks, individuals not following process, making it very, very difficult to be in compliance with the regulatory requirements. So, what we did is we took that information, we spent a lot of time looking at their organization, those 50 different functional groups, all of those different systems, how the content was being managed. The overall objective, at least, was that they wanted to achieve compliance as their underlying goal. They wanted to optimize IT spending and reduce it where they could, reduce that waste. Of course, improve productivity. And then, of course, they wanted to have proper legal defense should any issues arise as part of that process. So, we spent a lot of time working with this customer to help them optimize that part of their business, and made recommendations to leverage Microsoft 365 and centralize and standardize their records management processes. So we helped them eliminate volumes and volumes of working files or records that were located in a number of different systems. Most of these systems were unsecured. Some of them were even were not validated. We helped them increase collaboration. We helped them implement good records management practices. We were pushing throughout the whole project to reduce business risks that were tied to litigations and mismanagement of business records. When we're dealing with some of these critical business documents and content, it's very, very important that we're able to access and they're being managed in the right way, because we could leave ourselves open for litigation. And then, of course, we help them better organize their content, categorize and harmonize the process across the organization, reducing the total number of files that are stored and maintained within that environment. And then, more importantly, bringing everybody under one roof, bringing everybody into one system and increasing user adoption. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michael, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to leverage Microsoft 365 within the context of GXP from a more practical perspective. Michael?
Great, thanks very much. That was great, Oliver. And I'm gonna try to dive a little bit deeper now into some of the more practical aspects, and give everybody on the line some of our experiences in terms of implementing Microsoft 365 at various life science organizations. So one of the first things I'm going to want to talk about now is just the concept of the shared responsibility model, which is obviously very important to understand when we're dealing with any type of cloud-based application. Now, given that Microsoft 365 is a software as a service, in this case, the vast majority of the controls are actually managed by Microsoft. And so, that needs to be understood, and that can definitely be beneficial for organizations, but there are some challenges, especially when it comes to GxP compliance and being able to demonstrate that ultimately the regulated user is in control of the system and is able to demonstrate that it's fit for its intended use. So, it's definitely an important thing to understand. And we see that Microsoft is responsible for managing risks associated with the physical infrastructure, all the way up the stack to the identity and access management, whereas the regulated user or the customer is ultimately responsible for managing the data, the data classification, access to the data, protecting and making sure that only authorized individuals have access to the corresponding records that they should have access to. Now, this is especially important, the shared responsibility model, in the context of data integrity. So that's something that regulatory agencies around the world are actually focusing more and more attention on data integrity these days. And there's been quite a few that have published guidance in recent years that are specifically focused on data integrity, even though it's not a new concept. So the FDA has had regulations that are applicable to data integrity for many years, and so it's not a new concept, but like I said, it is definitely something that's been highlighted given the fact that we're using this outsourcing model where cloud service providers are managing a lot of the aspects and the controls of data that correspond to data integrity. So in the case of Microsoft 365, Microsoft's responsibility for data integrity are ensuring that the proper security controls are in place surrounding physical access to the data centers and any of the infrastructure components, as well as making sure that nobody has access to the customer data. Obviously, given that they're managing the actual physical assets, they need to have proper practices and standards in place to make sure that those are managed in a state of control, and that they're following a quality-driven design software design practice and delivery models to make sure that the quality is being maintained throughout the life cycle of the application. They'll also need to make sure that we're following a risk-based management process to make sure that risks are identified and properly mitigated with qualified individuals. On the customer side, there's still a need to have proper governance controls over the operational aspects of the system, and making sure that we have proper training of users and administrators of the system. They'll also need to manage the inputs, the processing, the storage, and the outputs of the data that's going into the system, making sure that we have all aspects of ALCOA being covered. So ALCOA is essentially, it stands for attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And they'll also, in a lot of cases, need to perform system validation to demonstrate that their intended use of the system is satisfied, and that it's appropriate for their intended use, and that they're able to cover all their regulatory compliance requirements. So given that it is a shared responsibility model, the life science organizations will need to rely on many of Microsoft's technical and procedural controls. And so they'll want to know that Microsoft has implemented a quality and secure development lifecycle that encompasses many of the same core elements as would be found in the life science customer's own quality management system. So these elements include clearly defined organizational structures with roles and responsibilities, documented procedures and policies, which govern the activities that internally trained individuals or contractors will be performing, that they're following a risk-based approach. And as I mentioned, the quality-driven design and secure development for the actual applications themselves. And then when it comes to the service delivery, that they have the proper controls around the operations, the release management, all the way to handling incidents and change controls, and managing all the audits that are being performed to ensure that these controls are adequate. And then ultimately, making sure that they have proper records management processes in place. So, in an on-premise system, life science organizations are typically the ones who are going to be managing all of the documentation that shows that the system is in a state of control. And in this case, they're going to be leveraging a lot of Microsoft's controls. And so we want to make sure that Microsoft also has all the proper documentation. And these documents are examples of various types of records that Microsoft maintains according to their record keeping and retention policies. And that includes various system documents, as well as records pertaining to training or testing and change control. So these records and this information is all critical and helps to reinforce the control aspect. So these are the various certifications that Microsoft has adhered to, and on an annual basis, there are third-party independent auditors that come in and look at all of the documentation and make sure that all the procedures are in place and that Microsoft is following the best practices. And some of the more important ones are SOC 2 Type 2. And that the reason why that one is significant is because it actually has quite a bit of detail in it with regards to what the controls are and how they're being verified by the auditor for effectiveness. And so we typically recommend that life science organizations look at these reports that are produced on an annual basis as part of their due diligence process. There's a lot of information in there that can be captured and that can be leveraged as part of that due diligence process. As well as FedRAMP, which is a federal attestation that Microsoft has adhered to, and it also has a lot of controls. There are over 100 controls in there that basically ensure that all the security aspects are being covered, and that Microsoft has verified that these are tested on a regular basis. The other aspect of control is obviously in terms of contractual obligations. So life science organizations are going to want to know that Microsoft is committed to ensuring these controls are always going to be in place and that they're going to be properly vetted. And so there are various documents that are relevant. So the online service terms, or the OST, which also has an addendum called the Data Protection Addendum, which has a lot of information in it about Microsoft's responsibilities and commitments with regards to various aspects of service delivery and data protection. One of the most important, like we said, is data integrity and data security. And it's interesting in there's also commitments with regards to auditing compliance, which life science organizations will probably be interested in that Microsoft is committing to initiate these audits by qualified independent third parties at least annually, and that they'll always be performed in accordance with these standards or best practices that are produced by the accreditation body for each applicable control or framework. They'll also committed to provide the audit reports, and these are typically available through the Microsoft Trust Center under NDA. And they're also committed to mitigating any audit findings. So these are all very important aspects, and we like to highlight these because in some cases organizations are not aware that these elements are actually covered. Now, when it comes to implementation of Microsoft 365, just do a high-level overview of the steps that we normally follow. So it begins with a proper development of a vision statement, where we identify what the overall objective is and how are we going to go about implementing Microsoft 365. One of the key deliverables there is a system description, which is usually the first document that we would show to an inspector or an auditor to understand what it is that what the system consists of and what it is that we're using it for. Then obviously there's performing the vendor assessment, which, like I described, would typically be done through an evaluation of those certifications and reports. And then on the customer side, the implementation of the governance processes. So things like system administration or proper use of the actual system so that users can be trained on how to use it properly. Then we'll want to identify any of the key risks or high risk areas of the system, and that might need to be validated to demonstrate that those critical features work as intended. Then we'll want to perform some business analysis to identify the proper configuration of the system. So this is obviously going to be different depending on each use case, and so it's important to understand what it is that we're using the system for. Then we'll be validating the actual business process, again, based on the risk that specific process has and its intended use. If we need to migrate content, then in some cases, we'll perform migration, and there are tools that Microsoft 365 has available that allow us to migrate content very easily from file shares or other systems. And then finally, we'll want to perform routine monitoring of the system and revalidation if necessary, if there are any significant changes. So when it comes to validation, the approach that we typically recommend is to follow like a building block approach, which basically involves looking at the core features that we're going to be leveraging of Microsoft 365, and looking at that from a generic standpoint and validating those core features. So making sure that the electronic records management capabilities are indeed in place and functioning as expected. Then for those business processes, we'll evaluate each business process on a case-by-case basis and determine, whether there's additional validation, usually in the form of user acceptance testing that would be performed. And you wouldn't have to repeat any of the validation that was performed as part of that initial validation. You'd be leveraging it. So it's a way of making the overall process a bit more efficient. When it comes to the actual features that we're looking at, or the capabilities, so there's several out-of-the-box capabilities that Microsoft 365 has that are really relevant to life science organizations. In most cases, they're using the system to manage electronic records. At the end of the day, that's really what we're doing. We're processing information, but ultimately it's storing what would be considered an electronic record. So there are various controls, such as user authentication through Azure Active Directory, as well as being able to set user permissions very specifically to be able to access either certain areas of the system or specific documents, and that's being done through SharePoint security groups. There's also the record retention capability, which allows us to set retention labels on documents and protect them as records and identify what the actual retention period is, as well as overarching retention policies and records management file plans. We can also apply classification and sensitivity labels to documents to be able to further secure them with encryption or preventing users from copying information or downloading information. There's also the ability to apply metadata onto documents so that we can properly classify it and report on it depending on our use case. And then in terms of the record lifecycle, obviously, given the fact that a lot of records go through various stages, they have a history, and so the version history is very useful to demonstrate what its lifecycle is. And there's also a capability that was introduced with the preservation hold library, which basically captures a true copy of each record whenever a document is either modified or deleted. And if we had as a retention policy placed on it, then a copy of that record will be placed in the preservation hold library where it will be retained and it cannot be modified throughout its retention period. And then finally, we have the unified audit log, which basically helps us to understand what are all the activities that are occurring on a document throughout its lifecycle. When it comes to GXP process management, customers are leveraging workflow automation tools such as Power Automate, which basically allows us to automate pretty much any business process. So, given that it's very configurable, it's easy to adapt, and so we're seeing a lot of different use cases, and the ability to automate repetitious activities or areas of the system that might be considered higher risk through automation is obviously a great feature. The real-time collaboration is another very important aspect. The fact that we can we can have multiple authors and individuals going into a document at the same time, working on it in real time is a definite asset, as well as the external sharing capabilities. So in a lot of use cases, we're not only dealing with internal employees, but we're working with vendors who have to contribute content. And so the ability to control the document, but share it, is a much improved process than how it used to be in the old days. You'd have to send attachments out and you'd have multiple copies of documents floating around. Now with the external sharing capability, it's very easy to maintain one source of the truth and have just that one copy that is being maintained, and we could always remove access to that document whenever necessary. And then finally, the automation of the site structure. So this is another important aspect when we're expanding the use of Microsoft 365. We want to have control over how we're provisioning those site structures, and there are various tools such as site scripts and site designs that allow us to create templates so that we have these repeatable templates that can be used over and over to create replicas of our desired configuration as many times as necessary. So here's a quick overview of Microsoft 365 in the context of all the different components that might be needed and might be validated as part of our effort, as well as any integrated third-party solutions. So it's distributed across various areas. We have Azure Active Directory, which is what we mentioned, our identity provider, and then we also have the Security and Compliance Center, which is where things like the unified audit log and record labels, as well as sensitivity labels, are going to be configured. And then we have the GXP sites themselves. So typically, we'll have multiple site collections being created, and each one can have a very specific need associated with it. And so we'll evaluate its need and perform the necessary validation. And it's also possible, obviously, that we have non-GXP sites. So given that we have the ability to manage site collections, it's possible to create boundaries around what is considered controlled and what needs to have more rigor around it versus, let's say, a project site or a collaboration site that's being used for non-GXP purposes. So once we've validated the system, another very important aspect, and that was one of the the challenges that we mentioned at the very beginning, was the management of change. So customers are going to want to be able to maintain the validated state and have to understand that there's various controls that are in place that can help to mitigate the risks associated with the fact that the system is changing. And so one of those is change notification. The other is being able to test changes that are about to come. So before those changes are actually implemented, demonstrating that there has not been any issues that have been introduced and the functionality still works as intended. And then ultimately monitoring the overall health of the system. So in terms of change notification, there are various tools at our disposal. So one is the Microsoft 365 public roadmap, which is going to give us the initial notification of any upcoming changes. So we could see up to a year or more in advance of any changes that are actually currently in development, and we see when those changes are scheduled to be released. And as we get closer and closer to the rollout, we get notifications through the Microsoft Message Center, which is available within the administration center of Microsoft 365. And there we could see details about what the changes are, whether it's a change where we need to just be informed of, or if Microsoft is recommending that we plan for the change, and they'll also tell us by which date we'll need to be able to act in order to mitigate any risks associated with that change. When it comes to change testing, we have the ability to leverage Microsoft 365 release rings. So these release rings start all the way within Microsoft itself. So when, as part of the secure development lifecycle process, new features are being released, there are various teams within Microsoft who are going to be performing testing. So the first team will be the feature team, who will test and validate the functionality. Then it rolls out to the entire Microsoft 365 team, and then ultimately entire Microsoft obtains that feature release. then it goes to what's called the targeted release. And a customer who might want to develop solutions or be able to test certain functionality before it gets released can leverage this targeted release in order to be able to do so. And it is also possible to set up a separate tenant through the Microsoft 365 developer program, in which that entire tenant can be set up on that targeted release ring. And so it allows you to go in and either perform testing or allow you to train users on these functionality that are coming ahead and before they get pushed into production. Then finally, when it comes to monitoring the system and making sure that it's up and running, we have the service health dashboard within the admin center as well, and that gives us visibility as to any incidents or issues that are currently occurring across the globe. It might not be affecting us currently, but they're potentially issues that might be worthwhile being aware of. So the service health dashboard definitely gives us that visibility. And we can go in all the way to the detail of each issue and see what the scope of the impact is, the root cause analysis, as well as a timeline for the next update or the resolution. Another tool that I want to cover is the compliance manager. This is something that's actually evolved a lot over the years, and there's currently a new preview of the tool being published. And it actually is very powerful in terms of being able to manage all of the different controls and those responsibilities that I spoke about earlier, because it basically lists out all of the various controls that have been verified through those audit reports. And it describes exactly what Microsoft has put in place when it's a control that Microsoft is responsible for. And it also lists out what recommended controls the customer should have. So it's useful for tracking all of those activities that would a compliance manager would need to put in place, and to be able to assign tasks and also verify the outcome of those activities. So if there are testing activities that are being performed, we can capture the evidence of that testing and be able to generate very detailed reports through the compliance manager. So here's just a quick overview of what it looks like. So we see it's a dashboard that gives you a score, in fact, for each of the different assessments. We can track what are all the activities, and we could see there's the Microsoft managed actions and the customer managed actions. And so as we're performing the activities, obviously the score will increase, and we'll be able to keep track of this over time. Here's another quick view where we see that the very detailed description of the actions that are needed to be performed, and it also has a very detailed cross-referencing to all the different controls. So in a lot of cases, we have similar control needs across various either certifications or attestations. And so what Microsoft has done here is created a mapping, which is very useful, so that we see that this is a relevant control and that'll be applicable to multiple certifications or attestations. And then finally, we have the compliance score dashboard, which basically rolls up all that information into one overarching score that a customer can track to see how well they're doing. And it's very useful to be able to get a at a glance view of all the activities that need to be performed. So with that, I'll pass it back to Oliver just to highlight some of the additional resources that Microsoft 365 Life Science customers have at their disposal.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michael, and that
Sure.
detailed overview there. So, obviously, as we were mentioning throughout this presentation and earlier on in the presentation, there's a number of different resources that are available to you as life science organizations to help in this transition to Microsoft 365. And so some of you or most of you may be aware of some of the guideline white papers that have been released by Microsoft over the years, which is a testament to the commitment that Microsoft has to life sciences, and also to the partnership that Montreal has with Microsoft. And so we have in the past released guidelines on Microsoft 365 as well as Azure, and there is also a new guideline for Dynamics 365 that will be released shortly, as well as updates to the previous white papers. If you guys would like to receive updates on when those white papers will be updated and released, you can actually go to the link on this slide here, and we'll make sure that this is also attached in any sort of follow-up emails that come out of this webinar, where you can actually sign up to receive a notification for when those white papers are being released. Some other really interesting resources, and obviously, Mike, you referenced a couple different tools that can be leveraged within Microsoft 365 today. Of course, you've got the Trust Service Portal, which is an incredible resource that you should definitely look into if you haven't, and of course the Compliance Manager that you were just going through. And then of course, I would like to draw attention to some of the resources that Montrim provides. We spend a lot of time and effort working with customers as well as Microsoft and our own internal experts to put together a whole range of different educational free to access content. You can access that content, read that content on our blog, or as well as our blog, we also have a series of on-demand webinars that talk specifically about Microsoft 365 and how you guys can move through it. So we'll finish very, very quickly on some actionable things that you guys can do tomorrow. And so when it comes to Microsoft 365, Montrim has developed a series of toolkits with a combination of expert resources, tools, and templates to help life science organizations make that transition and accelerate that transition to Microsoft 365. And that really starts with our discovery toolkit, where we'll spend time to work with your organization, do some business analysis, understand the strategic direction and what is required when we're moving to Microsoft 365. Then of course we reference the importance and need for vendor assessments, and so Montrim also provides a vendor assessment toolkit for Microsoft, assessing some of the controls that that Michael mentioned earlier on. Then of course a big part of the process is validation. Then we've got governance, an automation toolkit, and then of course a migration toolkit. So a series of different options available to help accelerate that process. And just to talk a little bit about the toolkits themselves, they're really a combination of expert services and predefined project steps alongside a series of automated tools, documentation, specification, procedures, test scripts, and other deliverables that can help accelerate that process. So with that, I'm just going to launch one final poll. If any of you would like to receive more information on the compliance toolkits that Montrim provides for Microsoft 365, please indicate here, and we'll be more than happy to send over some information that talks a little bit more about that. We'll give you guys a few minutes there. Michael, anything
just looking at the time? Yeah, no, I'm just looking at the time and realizing that we're just a couple minutes over. So, if there, I guess we could stay on the line if there are any questions at this point that we want to take while people are answering this poll.
What we'll do is I'll coordinate with Megan. We did have a couple questions that came in, but I want to be respectful of folks' time, and maybe perhaps in the follow-up email we'll put those. We did have a couple good ones come in. We want to just thank everyone for their time today. Thank you to Michael and to Oliver from Montrim, and I'll just turn it back over to you, Megan, to close out.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Oliver and Mike. Thank you to all of our participants for attending the Future of Digital Collaboration in Pharma and Biotech. If you have any other questions, please contact me. I'll put my email there in the link, megan@purposeevents.com. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email next week with a link to the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Health Impact Live, our sponsors Microsoft and Montrim, and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.